Benefiting her status as the Princess of Eldaron, Princess Leia was awfully wise, ladies and gentlemen, because it was she who said, Grand Moff Tarkin, the tighter you hold your fist, the more they're going to slip through your fingers. And that's the essential piece of advice that Proposition are following in today's debate. Because we see that we live in an unprecedented environment on a global scale, where people move from country to country. Rich doctors moving to the United States with welcome arms on behalf of the Americans, as well as poor people from Zimbabwe trying desperately to get into South Africa, looking for a better standard of life. The response to this from most governments has been tightly controlled border transactions. We have profiling of individuals, arbitrary rejections based on race, ethnicity, age, and the like. And essentially, what we need to concede to the fact in today's debate is that it's not working, ladies and gentlemen. Because we still have all the associated problems, or what many countries try to construe as problems, with immigration. And that's why we propose our model. Our model being that we follow the advice and the whisperings coming out of the federal Washington in the United States that we should lax control. We should make it easier for people to get into our country. We should make immigration more free. What do we mean by immigration? What do we mean by immigration? We're talking about people moving in and out of countries, crossing borders on either semi-permanent or fully permanent basis. But what does our model actually mean? Well, we just propose that there should be less regulation, less control, less profiling, less arbitrary distinctions. Essentially what we want, ladies and gentlemen, is the government to give us a very good reason for not letting us in, rather than us having to give them a very good reason to let us in. That's what South Africa are going for in today's debate. In terms of my case, I'm going to be talking about the responsibility to protect that we feel all states have, and then secondly, I'm going to be talking about how we have less drugs and more money. My second speaker is going to be talking about the free movement of aid, and then she's also going to be speaking about the importance and the respect nomads are due. Yes?
Isn't taking away the ability of the state to choose who they take in and how many immigrants they take in a complete destruction of the principle of state sovereignty?
No, we don't. I'm going to be talking about how sovereignty is inherently dependent on the responsibilities each country has in my first point of positive matter called the responsibility to protect. Okay, so we believe that the majority of people involved in this debate are poor, incredibly desperate people who are moving from a country within which a situation exists that they find untenable. No thank you. And the essential conclusion to this point is we feel that the United States federal government has an obligation to care for the poor Mexicans on their borders. Now, why do we feel that this obligation exists? No offense to Mexico. Well, we see that all people on some level value the provision of an acceptable quality of life. They believe in the intrinsic nature of life because we all like to be alive, but we also want each other to live some sort of acceptable life. And we think that the reason we want this is because it makes people happy and we think that's important, but beyond that, it allows for meaningful transactions amongst a community and the meaningful proliferation and progression of a society. No thank you. But beyond that, we believe that that all countries have some sort of moral obligation to these people, based on a number of levels. On the first premise that I've already established that we all ourselves value life. We value the provision of a quality of life. But more than that, we see that these governments have an explicit obligation because they condemn acts that don't allow for the provision of this quality of life to other people. And essentially what we're talking about is most countries in the world have some sort of law that abhors the action of not saving someone, ladies and gentlemen. It's not about actively preventing yourself from killing someone. It's about you have to go out and save people. So we're talking about like federal murder in the United States. We have an obligation in Australia that exists to save people that have been in some sort of car accident to try and save drowning children. And based on these two premises, that essentially the governments themselves have placed a burden on themselves to save other people, that's why we're going to hold them to this obligation. That's why we're going to hold them to this mandate. So and beyond that, we think they have a mandate to their own people, because on some level it eases the regional instability if you can mitigate the harms of a very dangerous and unstable neighbor. How do you mitigate these harms? With my second point of positive matter, which is the mitigation of illegal activity, or less drugs, more money. So what does our model do for the inherent problems in a moment, Emma, we could dance just now? What does our model do for the immediate problems with illegal immigration? When we're talking about the proliferation and the movement of drugs and guns and the like into these countries, our model makes it far more difficult for that movement to take place. Now,
how do they fulfill the obligation to their own people when an influx of unskilled or even skilled migrants means
okay, thank you. We believe that some sort of natural filtration exists, that the only countries into which migration really happens on a large scale is countries that have the capacity to deal with this. You don't move from one poor country into another poor country. That's why you move from Mexico to the United States, not Mexico to Guatemala. We believe that the United States, France, Germany, all these countries have the capacity to care for these people. And even if it's at some sort of minimalistic harm to their own people or some sort of cost, we believe that we provide for a total better quality of life for the most people, so the mandate still falls onto these governments. So essentially what we need to see is how do immigrants currently get into these countries without free immigration? We force them to use illegal mechanisms. Why? Because if you can't go through the government mechanism, you're going to try and rely on people who can get you across the border. Now, who can get Polish people into the United Kingdom through illegal mechanisms? Gangs, ladies and gentlemen. People who are trying to get other illegal things into the countries. Things like guns, things like drugs. And when you force these Polish migrants into using an illegal mechanism because they don't have the capacity to use a legitimate one, you allow them to be you allow a burden to be imposed on these people that they're already doing something wrong, and more than that, they're indebted to these gangs. That's why we believe that these governments have forced poor migrants who are trying to get into countries into the position of being a gun mule or being a drug mule. You have no other option. The cost of getting into a country, a legitimate right to get into that country, we would contest, is that you have to take cocaine into that country, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the harms that opposition are going to try and tell you that exist in these debates. But how do we mitigate that with our model? Well, if you allow for a regulated, legitimate mechanism, we see that people would rather use the safe, legitimate mechanism that doesn't involve you having to deal with the very scary drug dealer with scars on his face. You would rather talk to the friendly government official who wants you in their country that's going to let you get into that country. And we see that we have three distinct benefits. First of all, there's just no need for these people to use gangs. From that, we see that there's no need for them to carry guns or drugs into your country. And beyond that, we believe that one of the issues with tracking gun trafficking, with tracking drug trafficking, is there's so many people doing it, there's this mass wave of humanity crashing against your borders, that it's incredibly difficult to find the actual bad guys. If all the people who aren't really bad, they're just misguided, are now using our legitimate mechanism, the hardcore drug traffickers are going to stand up like a sore thumb, ladies and gentlemen. We allow police services to redirect their forces where need be. We no longer have the movement of these harmful things into the country. But beyond that, we need to see that from this, the natural conclusion to this analysis is a number of benefits to both parties, the country into which migration occurs and the country from which it's occurring. On the first point, the people we believe need help, so the poor country that are creating migrants, we believe that we ease the strain on their already strained capacity to care for the people. We're allowing them to move out of their country. Beyond that, we believe that their people get some sort of benefit from doing this. They get money, they get skills, which in the long run are going to benefit the country of their home. Why? Because many people are going to be incentivized to return there, because it is, after all, their home. But once you have skills that no one else in your country has, you have an advantage over those people. You have an incentive to return there and make most of that advantage. And the country themselves, like the United States, they get an influx of cheap labor, they get an influx of skill, they get an influx of people who are willing to buy into the American dream, who are willing to use that American dream, not only for their benefit, but for the benefit of the country that's giving them this privilege. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, we believe we should follow Princess Leia's advice. Open your hands and let the sand fly. Support free immigration. Thank you.